Welcome to Face. This is a show about change and what's next. It's a show that asks questions and peels back the layers of our average everyday experience and goes beyond scratching the surface. We interview people doing incredible things who are making a difference around the globe. Join me as we listen in and get one step closer to understanding that big ideas shared create collaboration. Collaboration can inspire community, and communities create social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face. Our interview this week is with a friend of mine, a young guy by the name of Justin Rahim. He's got a company called Black Label Urban Design. That's blklabel.ca. He's a pretty interesting guy. I think you're going to really enjoy this interview. We talk about Lego and about visual pleasure and about how you might experience space and what does it mean to kind of learn and explore within the environment of a designer. And Justin talks about a whole lot of things. We apply it to our day-to-day lives, we apply it to relationships, we apply it to philosophy. It's a great interview. I think you're going to enjoy it a great deal. Check it out. We'll see you shortly. Well, welcome to Face, and we have a very special guest with us today. Somebody, I don't think I've had a guest like Justin before, so why don't we introduce Justin? Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Justin Rahim, he's got a company called Black Label Urban Design. blklabel.ca. He's a lot of things, actually. He's a horticultural technician, which I don't even know what that means, so we're going to find out a little bit about that. Landscape designer. He's working on a furniture line. Apparently he's designed jeans for the Gap. He has a partial architectural degree, which we might or might not talk about. We're not sure at this point. But I think the key is that he is a professional designer living in Toronto and a new company that's launching in the very near future, Black Label Urban Design. So Justin, thanks for coming today. And I'm really looking forward to this from a whole lot of levels. So I was a construction worker for 18 years, worked in the field, worked in the office, started, blueprint drawings. So, did a little bit of that architecture as a student in high school. So I've always had kind of an interest in, what goes on in the building of a building. But I think there's also a really, and my listeners will know I've studied philosophy, and so there's a real interesting philosophical angle to all of this as well. And I hope we can talk about this idea of space and so on. I understand you used to play with a lot of Lego.
Absolutely.
So tell me a bit about that. And pretty sophisticated designs, pretty sophisticated building, like cities.
I did. I had some fun with Lego. Absolutely.
So tell me about that.
Lego is, I think, an amazing media because it's just so neutral and so flexible. It's really the simplest possible material to create just about anything you want. If you take a quick search online, you can see just about anything from sculpture to a full-size structure can be built out of Lego. And what that allowed me to do is really explore form. So much the way a sculptor would use clay, I explored architectural form with Lego. And it really allowed me to really see what the potential was with a structure and a dwelling could really be.
Were you more of the Star Wars model kind of guy, or were you, hey, just give me a box of pieces and I want to build?
I wanted the most neutral, plainest pieces possible. So I used to really enjoy building houses, and basically to build a house, I found that the typical pieces you might find, the doors, the windows, and whatnot, were just too restricting. So I would really just want plain bricks. With little or no personality, so I could basically custom tailor whatever I wanted.
So do you think, it's funny, I grew up with Lego and certainly nowhere near as sophisticated of a builder as you were, but I watch my kids play with it, and most of it is by set today, it seems.
Correct.
And from time to time, they will get out just pieces and kind of design a new spaceship or a new building or a car or something like that, which is always fun. But it's mostly the Star Wars models, the Friends Lego for young girls. There's very divisive, even gender sort of specific kind of Lego, right? Yeah. Which is a bit troubling on some level, but I get it on another.
Right.
You're a young designer. Does it bother you at all? Do you see that as a liability, a creative liability, or is that a creative opportunity?
I think it's all in the eye of the beholder. As someone who acquired as much Lego as I did as a child, there was definitely a whole bunch of sets in there. And the interesting opportunity that comes with those sets is that you get unique pieces that you can then incorporate into your design. So it teaches you to take something that you're given and work it into something that you want to create. So
it's an interesting comment. So I was with Victoria the other day. We were building a piece from a friend's set. Mm-hmm. And it has very distinctive colors,
right.
Like really cool yellows and blues and so on. And I said, and the comment was, "Oh, sweetie, no other Lego sets have these colors. Imagine what you could build with those, right?" So we'll see. I mean, I have no idea. She definitely seems to have a little bit more of a creative edge when it comes to things like that.
Right.
But, so did you? I mean, did you know you were going to be an architect, or is that is that something that you think just kind of developed? You had a real interest in space and buildings and so on.
I've always had an affinity for design, space orientation. As an 8 and 9-year-old boy, I was rearranging my bedroom. I was trying to figure out how do you make space work at its utmost efficiency and utmost visual pleasure. And I always knew I would end up in design. I think that if you asked anyone who knew me, anyone who met me, there was no doubt I would be doing something in design. I enjoyed every facet of it. I think as my career developed, I found myself moving sort of further away from architecture and much more to how you experience space and much more the elements that pull a space together from a much more human perspective. And that's really, I basically just followed my heart and soul and wherever it took me.
So it wasn't really necessarily I suppose everything's a cause and effect kind of a thing, but there wasn't really, which is kind of ironic, a design there. It just kind of unfolded for you, would you say? Like you said, I have an affinity for design, which is
right.
It'd be a great tagline for a company. We have an affinity for design, but. And then you found yourself within it.
Exactly. I honestly can't recall a single point in my life where design was not a part or a very conscious thought process with me. And my parents really fostered that in any way they could. So, they definitely encouraged my Lego habit far longer than it should have gone, and encouraged me to draw, encouraged me to play around. I rearrange my bedroom in ways that no parent would have approved of, but they let me do it just so that I could learn and explore and gain something from the experience.
Do you think that your parents are in the poorhouse today because of your Lego habit?
That you'd have to ask them about.
Because I know how bloody expensive Lego
is. It is very expensive.
But you know what? It's so funny. Like, even as a kid, I remember how cool Lego was.
Yeah.
Everything fit.
It did.
It was just perfect. And there's been a couple of things that have come along since that have tried to kind of replicate Lego. It just doesn't got it.
No.
Right?
No.
There is no other Lego, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like I said, it's the simplest, most organic tool to build anything you want.
Toy.
And I think you learn how structure works, you learn how gravity works. You even learn how to put color together, and
so why didn't you become a construction worker? I mean, why didn't you become you were going to become an architect by the sounds of it, or at least academically, you're going to get a degree in that. But it's kind of interesting to me. You're actually with the pieces, because now you're more theory.
For sure,
way, right?
For sure.
Well, you're both, I suppose, because you're on site, your boots on the ground, as it were,
yeah.
working with the clients and so on, and designing their spaces. But a lot of it's got to be happening in your head and heart, I would imagine.
For sure. I definitely like to get my hands dirty and get into the process for sure. But I found very often, if you were on the construction side of things, you weren't really creating from that theoretical perspective.
You're building somebody else's.
You're building from instructions. And I mean, even when I put furniture together, I seldom use the instructions. I have a pretty good intuition as to how things go together and how they should fit together. I guess that's why construction was never really an end game for me.
So are you a problem solver or are you an artist?
I would see myself more... That's tough. That's tough. I think I solve problems with art. So it's almost a hybrid of both. Typically when I walk into a space with a client for the first time, there's sort of two things that happen. Almost instantly, I see the problems at hand, and I walk in and I see the completed space. So basically, my goal from the second of walking into a space is guiding the client and getting them from where they are now to the space that I've walked in and seen almost instantly. And a space for me has to be interesting, it has to be creative, it has to be unique. I'm not one to sort of run to a big box store and say, this is done, this is done, this is done, let's all throw it in the space and call it a day. I like custom tailoring, I like curating, and I like using the client's own personal style, and expressing that in a way that's pleasing to everyone.
Do you look for sort of telltale signs? If the guy drives or the client, I should say, drives a particular kind of car or dresses in a particular kind of way. Are these in the gambling world you would call them tells?
Right.
Do they sort of tell you anything? Do they set you up to say, okay, I got a sense for the colors I'm going to be using, or is that something that kind of unfolds over time?
Sometimes. It very often depends on the client. Some clients have a very defined sense of what their style is, and some clients need a little bit of guidance or need even a push to go for something a little bit more adventurous. I like color. I'm not afraid to use color, but most people, if you were to ask them, would you paint a wall in your house bright red? They would say absolutely not. Would never happen.
It's too loud.
It's too loud. It's too... And, I think if you're going to try to push the envelope a little bit, or if you want a space that's inspiring, you have to sort of go to a slightly further level or push yourself beyond your standard comfort zone. So with with a lot of clients, they dress for work. They dress for whatever is expected of them wherever they're going.
Yeah.
But a lot of other clients will have very clear dictations. Sometimes I'll walk into a client's house, they'll have a guest bedroom that happens to have a bright blue throw in it or something like that. That's very often a telltale sign, because they bought this blanket because they liked it.
Right.
It's not a room that they live in all the time, and that can very often say, well, they like color, maybe they just don't know how to use it. And that's where I step in and say, okay, how can I take this as a jumping off point to express this space?
So, I've joked with, I hear that Einstein always wore the same clothes, and listen, I'm not saying I'm an Einstein, but there's value in that to me.
Yeah.
I've always, so here's an interesting, so I'm always looking for the perfect shirt.
Okay.
Don't want to iron it, don't want it to wrinkle, got to feel nice, and it's got to, look nice. So that's actually tough. You would think that would be pretty easy in this day and age of synthetic fabric. Well, I think I finally found one.
Okay.
And but okay, well, why don't I just buy 20 of those and never have to worry about wearing a shirt again? So I would say I don't really have a style, and yet I guess I do. So I guess I'm not even sure what question I'm asking, but am I limiting myself, I suppose, maybe is the question. I see it as a utility.
Right.
I got to wear something. I want to be warm. But you know what? In truth, I also want to look nice.
Right.
Whatever that means.
Whatever that means.
Because my idea of nice and yours are probably going to be different, and color and so on. I would never paint a room red, probably.
Okay.
But I might. I don't know, right? So, anyway, this whole idea of style is pretty interesting. And then you've got this idea that style is well, you got your 70s and you got your 80s. When you see a 70s film, you really go, wow, did people really wear that then? Did they wear their hair like that?
I think style to me is rooted in design. So I don't like to look at trends or to look at what is or isn't happening, because that's such a fast-paced way to, one, date yourself, because if you look at what was trendy 3 years ago, it already looks dated today. For me, style is a personal expression. And for me, what is in style or what looks good is all about how it's curated. There's some...
What do you mean by that, all how it's curated?
I think there's beauty in every era. You can't go back to any particular time frame, 70s, 80s, and whatnot, and not find one object or one piece or one hemline or whatnot that is not absolutely stunning. because everything was designed with some sort of purpose, with some sort of intention, with some sort of aesthetic value to it. Something that I think has come back in a lot of ways from the 70s, which a lot of people have been hating on for a while, is that sort of boiled wool, tweedy textile. And here you are seeing that sort of professor look, the very, very understated, sort of nubbly textile. Is very much hot and it's very much back. But a lot of people look back at 70s pictures and see that same textile and say, ooh, I can't believe anyone ever wore that.
Right.
So design transcends time. Good design transcends time. Authentic design transcends time. And I think that's the important thing.
So is there okay, let's talk about design with respect to architecture. So
Okay.
we've got clothes, we've got colors, we've got interior stuff going on, and I'm sure there's all kinds of launching points there. But is there an ethic behind design? Is there an ethic behind architecture? So I'm thinking of I just saw an image of it a couple nights ago, the Human Rights Museum in Winnipeg. How about old churches,
Absolutely.
from 500,000-600,000? I remember sitting in a wedding in Switzerland, and I'm in a 700-year-old church. And then you go into a church today and it looks like Xerox.
Right.
Right? There's no iconography. There's
Yeah.
there's none. It depends. I guess if you go into an old classical Catholic church, you're going to see lots of icons and sculpture and tile and wonderful woods and things. But the modern day church is just a box, right? Even corporately,
Right.
right? And so, yeah, and then you've got these postmodern gas chambers, right? That inhibit most cities around the world. So can you comment about that at all? I mean, how does is that changing the way I see the world by walking into a building that's, I don't know, warm, that welcomes me in, that's reminds me of home?
There's 100% a correlation. I think if you look at some of the spaces that you very often feel most comfortable in or most inspired by, they have some sort of architectural or interior design element that really, really resonates with you. And I think if you really take it back to a much smaller scale, the places that you feel at home in. Now, maybe not necessarily the most beautiful to everyone. Everyone's home is different, but there are certain elements of that space. I mean, I think everyone who moves into their projected home will paint a wall. They'll have a throw. They'll pick a color for their couch. And these design selections, these design choices are what make you feel comfortable and inspired in your own space. And then you take that to the larger scale with say the Human Rights Museum or anything that is indicative of a much bigger cause. That's exactly what they're trying to evoke. They want you to feel inspired. They want these exhibits to shine. And you walk into a space like that, there's no way you can't.
Well, I mean, even the use of natural light, for instance.
Absolutely.
Right? So, don't you feel better in a house that has windows?
Absolutely.
You got lots of sun. You're in a corner office versus a cubicle inside.
Absolutely.
I'll never forget visiting a fairly large-scale NGO in the West End of Toronto. Came off the third floor elevator, and my heart just sank because I had worked at the Royal Bank in Toronto that was basically cubicle central. And I walk out, and it was just this sea of cubicles, and I couldn't see one human being, except the guy that I was with.
Yeah.
And I didn't say that at the time, but my heart sank. Like I actually had this, wow, I never want to work in this environment again.
Right.
This can't be good.
It can't be. Absolutely not. And I think more and more offices are trying to move away from the cubicle model. We're definitely seeing it in a lot of the contemporary offices where it's a lot more open plan. So we're taking down the walls. We're being more team oriented, and sort of bringing everyone to the natural light. Because I think it goes without saying, if you're inspired by your workspace, you'll work well. If you feel fresh and energetic and alive, you're going to want to do more ambitious things. You're going to want to feel more alive in your office space. So I think we should be moving away from that, and I'm seeing it in the office spaces that we're doing now, for sure.
So what sickens you from a design perspective when you walk into a place, and how do you not give that air off. Like you walk into an office or you walk into somebody's home and you go, wow.
That's a funny question. I am one of those people who doesn't get invited to people's homes very often because everyone is always afraid of what I'm going to say or think.
You've got your iPhone out taking pictures around the room. It's going to appear on your blog next week. What not to do.
What not to do. I don't discriminate, and that's the reality of being in a career that is, very subjective. What someone calls home may not be what I call home.
Yeah, sure.
But everyone makes an effort in their own way to make their home as beautiful as they can. If I walk into a space, things that I'm trying to think what's the most common thing that I see. I think very often people look at magazines and websites. Pinterest is notorious for this, where people post about 1 billion pictures of things they like. The thing about what makes, say, a light fixture or a table or a design feature look good in a space is that it's specific to that space. It's been custom tailored and referenced in other ways. And I think the one thing that drives me most crazy is when you walk into someone's house and you see a collection of things that don't belong together, but would look nice in their respective spaces. So someone who might have like a vintage slab table, in a very traditional home, it looks out of place. It looks dirty.
Is that a distinction between sort of juxtaposition or contrast or something? Is that what
for
you're
sure?
talking about?
For sure. A lot of
it's ridiculous the amount of metaphors here. For
Absolutely.
Living life, for building relationships, for networking.
Absolutely.
For starting entrepreneurial spirit. There's just so many connecting points here.
For sure. I think the biggest mistake people will make in their home is they'll put too many different styles. There's this really hot topic of eclectic right now, where people get to sort of put a curation of styles. I think what a lot of people take eclectic, when they think eclectic, they end up saying, well, I can just put anything I want in the space. And what you end up with is a hodgepodge or a storage locker of furniture that doesn't belong together. Mm-hmm. What people should aim to do is, everything in moderation, the way you would do anything else in your life. You stick to 2 styles, pull it together, keep your colors consistent. You'll have a beautiful home. It's not a difficult task. I think it's just a matter of, as opposed to looking at each individual piece of furniture, look at the whole space and think about how it would look together.
So let's go a little philosophical for a second. Michel Foucault wrote a book called Discipline and Punish. He was all about ideology. He was all about structure and foundation and, the whole notion of keeping the common man down.
Okay.
And what do our surroundings, what do our frameworks communicate? So as a teacher, I walk into a classroom. I'm up at the front. There's tiered seating. I'm the expert. Right. Whether I want to be or not.
Right.
Just because the way the room is set up, the way it's positioned, everyone's staring at me, they put up their hands, it's part of the pedagogy. What is this communicating to those individuals? Their points don't matter, they've got questions, they don't know as much as I do, etc. That's a problem for me. That's a wall that I try to break down a variety of different ways.
Right.
In the same way, Foucault says, prisons, for instance, hospitals, schools, they all have this medicinal, concrete kind of bar-like edge that basically squeezes out our humanity on some level. So I guess the question is, do you think, having a warm space, having the right throw, not having this, what did you call it, a storage locker of furniture, is that gonna enable me to develop better relationships? Am I going to be able to love my kids more? Like, honestly, this is a genuine question. So where I grow up, where I'm raised, is going to have an impact on who I'm ultimately going to be, I guess, is the point.
I think a passion for the home is a much larger picture than the way your house looks. I can only speak from experience. My parents made a very clear and conscious effort to make the home a beautiful place. And that becomes a process that is exposed in a variety of different ways. The beautiful home is also comfortable. It also, it's something that you remember. It's something that you have a very vivid experience in. I think it also makes for a much more enjoyable place for every level in the family. So something they prioritized was allocating space that is kids, allocating space that is adults. I understand that this is sort of implementing that hierarchy, but it's also implementing a positive space for both parties. I think ideally you need separate space for the kids and the parents, or else both go crazy. If you live in too close quarters altogether, people start to sort of lose it. So just to that point, I think that a beautiful home, a well thought out home, will inspire better living. And it's more or less from a
seems
practical
to make
standpoint.
sense, right? I mean, it's kind of a trivial truth in a way.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you live in a cluttered storage locker,
Absolutely.
aren't you always going to be in a state of being pissed off?
Absolutely.
Frankly?
For sure.
I mean, I guess, see, one of the things I've noticed, this is an interesting comment too.
Okay.
I love this stuff.
Okay.
So my wife Elizabeth recently got some fabric for a bench that
Okay.
I've been used to. That's
Okay.
green, it's got stripes, and it's fine. And why would we change it, right? Comes home and it's got this, I don't know, she's going to laugh if she hears this, but paisley like flower design.
Okay.
I don't like it.
Okay.
And maybe because I'm not used to it.
Okay. Absolutely.
I'm okay with that. But you know what? It's been sitting there now, not put into place, been sitting there. I'm used to it now. Now I've noticed it a couple times in the last few weeks.
Yep.
Give me another week or two, it will become a part of my environment.
Absolutely.
I will no longer care.
Absolutely.
Now maybe that's because I don't put a lot of value in these things. There could be a lot of different reasons for it, but I think philosophically, phenomenologically, it's really interesting because it becomes a part of my environment. So maybe I could live in a house, a storage locker full of furniture, but I think that it's still going to have an impact,
for sure,
on how I behave, how I interact with others. I mean, that whole cubicalism. I think we just coined a new word, but if open spaces allow you to work better, then it seems to me that's going to transfer to how you live at home, right?
Absolutely. I think the bench is a great example of how change can actually have a positive effect. So, and in your case, there's two parties involved, and this is actually a great example of how great compromise can be. The bench functionally is something
I guess
that
design is kind of an exercise in compromise.
It's absolutely,
isn't it?
absolutely, especially when more than one party's involved.
Right.
So one party felt that the bench visually wasn't doing enough for her. It just wasn't where it needed to be. And the other party felt that the bench was fine. It was fine. It works. It's serving the purpose. I always have a rule with clients. When we try something that's a little past their comfort zone, I always tell them, live with it for 2 weeks. Get it into your psyche. Get used to it, so that you're not staring at this bold piece or this right. object that is pushing you out of your comfort zone. After a while, you start to realize it really is just a bench, and it is maybe not your first choice in fabric color, but it brings life in another way, or it brings life for another party in the household. I think that's a beautiful thing, because now Elizabeth is probably much happier with the bench. It's still serving the function you have, and it's growing on you. And I think that's just a great exercise in how making a small design change can actually benefit the whole household.
I remember as a magician when I used to perform on stage, and I would see another performer who would use a handkerchief, let's say a big 24-inch square silk handkerchief,
right, that
he or she didn't iron before they went out on stage.
Right.
Wow, you go, holy cow, buddy.
Yeah.
You couldn't have ironed that? Like, wow,
Absolutely.
what a low-end act, right? But the guy who irons it, I don't go, wow, look at that. Look at the attention to detail.
Yes.
So it's like I notice I was going to try to be clever. I noticed the noticeable, but
right.
I notice the wrinkles, but I don't notice it when it works. So in other
right.
words, I was going to say, I walk into a space and I go, wow, this is awesome. But you don't go, it's awesome because of all these things. Justin did this and he
right.
chose that color and he did this. It works.
It works.
It intuitively works. It speaks to me or something.
It feels natural.
It feels natural. And I always thought that was kind of an interesting distinction, that I notice when it's shouting at me, but not when it just exists, I guess.
Exactly.
You know, it's comfortable space. It's as you use wonderful words about beauty and comfort and home and so on. Brings life in another way was a
Right.
great phrase you used. But there's something else going on here. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people, either lose or are afraid of in design. I think if you add a bold element, it shouldn't be the first thing that you notice and the only thing you notice. It should work in conjunction with everything else that's going on in the room. So, a well-curated space will have touches of things that are interesting and different and quirky, but they're not going to steal the show. They're not going to be the only thing you notice, and they're not going to be a distraction from everything else that's going on. At the end of the day, the space is not there to exist for itself. It's there to exist
Right. It's
for
not
its user.
it's not a showroom.
Exactly.
Well, I guess it could be.
It could be if you want
So what's interesting too is you do go into some houses and you go, wow, this is kind of like a museum. Nobody lives here, right? It's they might as well just keep plastic on the
Yeah.
furniture. In fact, some people probably
and
do.
some people do. Yeah.
Yeah, that was very 70s, right?
It was very 70s.
I remember.
And it's managed to live on quite long.
Is it
Yes.
really?
Yes.
So I remember going into some bigger homes where they would have very museum, like they would actually have a rope. You wouldn't like they didn't want you sitting in that showroom or whatever
Right.
it was.
Right.
So why bother?
I agree. I don't think you should ever have a home that's not meant to be lived in, or a space that's not meant to be lived in.
Right.
That's a very sort of old world, traditional Victorian concept of
Right.
the formal parlor, the formal living room, which you
Yeah.
only use on special occasions. And this is something that you're seeing. If you look at sort of the modern home and
Yeah.
what that
Yeah.
floor plan looks like, the formal living room doesn't exist anymore.
My Elizabeth and I sometimes will joke. We have a big wall that we've done some work in the kitchen.
Okay.
So we have a wall now that's waiting for a painting or
Okay.
a series of paintings or whatever. Elizabeth will choose a painting probably that suits more based on color.
Right.
And so on. Whereas I will pick a painting or a photo or whatever based on how it speaks to me.
Okay.
Or if it speaks to me. And they don't always align. In fact, they rarely align.
Okay.
It seems to
Okay.
me. So. I mean, maybe actually Kandinsky or somebody like that
Right.
might, because very colorful work and so on also speaks to you in an abstract way. What are your thoughts about that? I mean, is that a client focused thing? So you go, okay, this guy's more color focused or he's more thoughtful.
It's hard because when I design a space, I see artwork. I see it up. And anyone who knows me knows that in my home, the frames typically go up before the artwork gets in. I think it's very specific to the client. I've had clients who have very, very well curated art collections, but their favorite piece isn't the piece that goes with the room. So
Right.
I think a lot of people pick art as a final step. And I think a lot of times you need to introduce the art much earlier into the design process so that you can work it into the room, because especially if it's going to be a personal piece. In one room in my home, I have a pair of yellow jeans hanging that I designed. And that was actually a jumping off point for that entire room. It's a really bold piece, and it's a piece that I love, but I designed the room around that. And I think that's usually the best way to pick art. Now, chances are when most people are putting a room together, they haven't had the foresight to go that route, because it's a very odd way to look at going to a room. It's not intuitive to think, pick your accessories and build the room around it. When you get to that situation, I think with art, the most important thing is that it does have meaning. We've all been into places with meaningless art, and you get no drive or inspiration from it. The point of art is not to fill up a wall. The point of it is to elicit an emotion.
That's what I think. I mean, obviously not everyone agrees.
For sure.
Right?
Now
so
that
art,
does,
you got your still life art and you got your insightful art. Not that still life can't be insightful, because I think it can.
I have to make sure I get this in. That doesn't mean though that it doesn't also work with the room. And I think that's why a lot of people think when they look at that blank wall and say, oh my God, I've got to fill this up. This is driving me crazy, and they end up rushing this process, which can often take 12 plus months. I think the biggest mistake, and I mean this is a much bigger thing in people's homes, is that they're in this perpetual rush to fill it up.
Right.
And that's why we go to the big box stores and say, I'll just take the full suite. I'll just take this. And get it done, so I don't have to think about it anymore.
Yeah.
I think living with an empty space and slowly curating what you want, good quality, will not only save you money, but also end up with a much more interesting space in the long run. So with that wall, there's no rush to put art up there.
I think the danger for me, and this is also, I'm going to go philosophical in
Yeah.
here a little bit, but the idea of living with an empty space, or sorry, not an empty space, but let's say you are 85% finished because of my construction background. What I found over the years is people just got so used to it. And I think there's a comment here about structure
Yeah,
and about the way
absolutely.
we live our lives, whether it's with language or the work we do or the way we behave or the books we read. We get used to the foundation. We get used to the structure, and it just becomes a part of who we are. So I would see so many people who are now living in places at the 85% mark.
Right.
The drywall wasn't finished
Right.
in the basement. It didn't even get taped. Or maybe it got taped, but it didn't get sanded, right?
For sure.
The baseboard's missing. Or the vents, the grills for the vents didn't get put in because,
Right.
but the places that were finished first, where you actually went through with a deficiency list, those guys had a finished home
Right.
when you went in a few years later. So I don't know. I think there's something kind of interesting there with that whole idea. But you're as a designer, you've got the intention that people like myself don't have when it comes to this kind
For
of thing.
sure,
it seems
for
to
sure,
me.
is to get it to that 100,
Right.
let's call it 110%.
That's what I'm hiring you for,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Now, that being said, I think it's very easy to become complacent, to say, we're there, it's good enough, let's move on to the next thing. And I think that goes back to this I think interior design has become an obligation to a lot of people. It's not an enjoyable process.
Interesting.
I have to get something to sit
It's on my to-do list.
It's on my to-do list. It's there with doing laundry, with
Right.
getting the groceries. It's not a fun process, and I think people need to reinterpret.
Yeah, I was going to say that must break your heart, but it must sadden you a little bit when you see the pleasure, you see the not just the utility, but the purpose
For sure.
behind it, the life.
For sure.
Behind design, behind architecture, behind space.
And
that's what I find so fascinating about the work you do. It's not just colors
for sure.
or structure. It's way more than that.
And I think almost anyone can recognize, when they walk into a beautiful space, I seldom see anyone who doesn't react or say this feels nice or doesn't have some sort of emotional reaction. And I think that should encourage people and inspire people to take the same approach to their own homes. We've all done it where you get into a space and you just, I need a couch to sit on right now. I need a table to eat at right now.
See what's on Kijiji.
Exactly. See what's on Kijiji. And you know what? I'm all for that. The thing about that mindset, a lot of people think by buying something cheap that it is, in the long run, saving money. Chances are, if you're buying something cheap, you're sacrificing quality, you're sacrificing style, you're sacrificing something. And you're still spending money at the end of the day. So if you spend $50 on a table versus $500 on a table, yes, I understand there's a significant price difference. However, if you take that $50 towards that $500 table, maybe wait a little bit longer, that table becomes more attainable and you end up with a better quality piece and something that you love a lot more, something that you're proud to sit at and something that you're proud to have people over at. Our homes are not just for, the one person to dwell in.
Tell me about the relationship. So very much into the whole idea of relationship. We often hear it's all about relationships. Tell me about that relationship between you and the space that you find yourself in from day to day.
Right.
I mean, that's a pretty abstract question maybe in some regards, but I want to read a quote here in a second from Martin Heidegger, a German philosopher, that in an essay he called Building Dwelling Thinking. And we're coming near to the end of the interview, but I'm thinking in relation to I've been doing yoga now for a couple of years, restorative yoga, not the hot yoga, so I'm not really interested in tone and losing weight. I'm interested in coming down. I'm interested in that 90 minutes of space that I have set out each week with Shelley, who's amazing, in the class, for myself. And for me, it's a relationship between, I don't even know what it is, Justin. It is a spatial thing, right? It is a relational thing. There's a feeling in the room. It's a square room. It's an ugly room. There's mirrors. There's a cork floor, and I'm on a mat, etc. So it's kind of medicinal in a certain way. But wow, has it become a ritual, but it's become very important to me. So anyway, I'm just interested to know how you relate to space and what it kind of means to you, I suppose.
I guess the space to me that's probably most intimate to me is my home, and for me, I'm constantly trying to create a habitat, something that is effectively an escape, but also a jumping off point for everywhere else that I go. I don't spend a lot of time at home, but when I do, I need it to be enjoyable. I need it to be comforting. I think a very specific time of year where where I actually spend the most time at home is winter, because I'm constantly trying to escape the cold. I don't handle the cold very well. And so my home has been designed to offset that. So the walls are deep and dark. The lighting is very warm, and everything is sort of driven around offsetting that feeling that I don't really like. And I think that's how we need to look at our homes, is create an atmosphere, create an ambiance for a space that makes you feel comfortable, that makes you feel safe, that makes you feel inspired. I work a lot from home, so when doing that, I need to be inspired by my
So you find being at home is a creative space for you.
Absolutely.
You don't have to go to a coffee shop or
Exactly.
out to the park or
Exactly.
wander through the woods to get an idea. You can do that in many different spaces.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
So Heidegger says, quote, "The way in which you are and I am, the manner in which we humans are on the earth, is dwelling. To be a human being means to be on the earth as a mortal. It means to dwell." And I think he's talking about, I mean, it's probably one of the more difficult philosophers to read.
For
Often
sure.
German and French philosophers were, the existentialists especially. But this idea of dwelling, this idea, I think, of what he's talking about ultimately is language and the structure and so on. But there's something about this idea of home that is so fundamentally important and compelling. And now that I have kids and, and so on. And I don't just mean a suburban place to go.
Right.
Because I think Heidegger would say that a truck driver, that a cabbie can be at home behind the wheel of their car.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense to you?
For sure. The way I would look at it is, what is the first thing that most people do when they get into their cubicle? If we're going back to that model, you personalize it with something. You put a picture in.
Right.
You put an object. You take something that makes it yours. And I think we do that with our cars. I think we do that with our homes. And so the place that you spend the most time in, you'll inevitably do something. If you're in a rental car, you'll play the music that you want to hear. It just makes it feel a little bit more at home. It makes it feel you. I think by picking a color on your car is very well making a design statement that makes you more excited about the home. So absolutely, we're forced to move all the time. We're forced to be in places maybe that we wouldn't necessarily choose as our first choice as home, but we are constantly working on a way to make it.
It's an extension of the whole cliche that there's no place like home. I mean, I think there's a reason where that came from. I mean, I guess I believe, and we're probably going to have to wrap this up now, but I think I believe that we're all pretty uncomfortable, actually. Period.
Yeah.
And then I would say we're uncomfortable in our own skin.
Okay.
Most of us, not all of us, but most of us. And so we're this truckload of insecurity and baggage from our youth and our upbringings and our religious background and our fellows, whatever it is. And so I think we're always in some way just trying to get back home.
Yeah. I think that's it. I think it's a great way to look at it. And however you try and manifest or create home, I mean, that's your prerogative, and that's what you're doing to deal with your personal set of emotions.
I love the way you've talked about the life behind design and the beauty of it, and almost, we didn't use the word wonder at all, but it just takes something that so many of us probably, including myself, see as kind of banal and uninteresting, but we know it when we see it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? I don't think design, but when I see it, I go, wow, you can see the thought or the attention to detail, the beauty of it, right? It just, we're back to the Lego models.
Absolutely.
Right? There's a simplicity, like you said, there's a simplicity, there's a beauty there that's just marvelous. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
So Justin Rahim talking to us today about all things beautiful. He's got a company called Black Label Urban Design. Check them out, blklabel.ca, and we'll we'll look forward to chatting again sometime soon.
Look forward to it. Thanks so much.